Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Clancy Imislund. I'm an alcoholic. I'm very glad to be here. Glad to be a functioning member of Alcoholics Anonymous tonight. Glad to be going to a meeting that's close to my house for a change instead of being some God-forsaken place out in Placentia or some hideous place. I'm not judging them. But I'm glad to be here. I've enjoyed the meeting. I've enjoyed the readings, about Chapter 5 and Chapter 3 and the traditions by whatever your name is. Yes, I'm just not being mean to Maggie. I'm being mean to him because I know him. And enjoyed Maggie's talk, and thinking as she was talking, it's a strange thing. The book is certainly correct when it says we are people who would not ordinarily mix, and we find ourselves together at these meetings. People from all sorts of backgrounds and patterns and ways to go. I was talking to a young lady here who's been sober for many years, 43 years, I guess. And we were talking about some old friends of ours. I was going to meetings when she was at the Beverly Hills group in the 1950s. And we have, all of them are gone or dead or moved. Most of them have moved to heaven, or as has been said, somebody said the other day somewhere, probably the crudest expression I ever heard for passing to the next room. Oh, he's just doing the dirt dance. You know. I was so shocked, I swore I'd never repeat it. And I never will. I can look around and see none of you will remember it. But we all come from extremely different backgrounds, and yet we wind up in the same room as though we were all destined to be here. I have very little. I used to think when I was little, if I had some brothers and sisters, I would be screwed up. But now Maggie said she had 6 brothers and sisters, so that isn't the answer. And I've always had kind of a lust for adventure, and I run around and I do things. And when I was a kid, I grew up in a very nice Christian home in a little town called Eau Claire, Wisconsin. I sometimes have come to believe maybe these Christian homes are breeding grounds for alcoholism, because so many people get up and say, I came from a nice Christian home. You know, you never heard anybody get up and say, I came from a mafia home. Always nice Christian homes. Now, Maggie, I didn't read all the way during your talk. At least simulate interest. And when I was a boy growing up, I was Andy Hardy type home in a sense, and but by the time I was 15, by the time I was 12, I was doing pretty well. I was a fast study and a reader, and I'd been shoved ahead in school, and that left me a little inconvenienced because you can shove ahead to an intellectual level, but you're behind in a physical level. So I went from being kind of the leading athlete in my class to the last kid picked, a grade and a half ahead, and so on. When I was 12 years old, my parents got divorced, and I was raised in such a strict church, I'd never even heard of a divorce. They say nothing, I've seen one. And I didn't know what to make of that, and yet I instinctively handled it as badly as it can be handled, almost instantly. I began to play my parents against each other to avoid discipline. I had no reason to do it, but I just always a sly boots, I guess. And by the time I was 13, I was kind of getting down to the whack, and by the time I was 14, by the time I was 15, I'd gone from being a straight-A student to being just barely in school and crying victimization and a lot of things. And the Second World War just started. I was 15. I didn't feel good. I started my junior year of school, and I wanted to do something. And I was restless and irritable and discontent, which the phrase Maggie was searching for I almost said it to you, restless, irritable, discontent is how we get. And so one day I told my mother I was going to go to Superior, Wisconsin and visit my aunt, and she gave me bus fare and packed my little bag, and I took it and hitchhiked to San Francisco. Had no idea where the hell I was going. Stupid, dumb little pimply face. I hitchhiked stood outside of Minneapolis, and a guy stopped, said, "Where are you going, kid?" I said, "San Francisco." He said, "So am I, hop in." And away we went. And, I didn't think that was anything unusual. He was in the Navy going back to his ship, but I guess he just needed a lower companion to talk to on the way. And we'd stop they didn't have motels like they'd done. They had trailer camps and things like that. We'd stop every night. He'd get me a bed, and he'd buy my meals. And I didn't think anything about it. I thought I look back now, you think there's so many incidences now. Every time I pick the paper, or every time I go to a meeting almost, it's someone who's now just discovered they were sexually abused as a child. And I'm sure that's happened. I never knew it was happening, but apparently I'm the only one in America that wasn't. And I feel rejected, actually. It's not easy to feel not wanted. But anyway, this guy took me to San Francisco, and that's all I thought. You tell people where you want to go, and they take you there. Yeah, who knows? And he told me I was probably too young to get in the Marine Corps. He said, "Why don't you try to get in the Merchant Marine? They're really crying for men, and you're small, but tell them you're 16. They'll not say anything." He showed me where to go, and I went to the Coast Guard office in San Francisco, dumb little puke, and said, "I want to be in the Merchant Marine." He gave me an application. I filled it out, put down 16. He said, "Well, if you're only 16, you have to have your parents sign this application." So I took it around the block, had my parents sign it, brought it back. I'll tell you how they're crying for men. They issued me temporary seamen's papers right there, and we're going to follow them up in the mail, as they did later. He sent me to the National Maritime Union down on Montgomery Street. I didn't know where the hell I was going. Somebody showed me where to go, and they had me sign the union dues for my waiver, so take it out of my check. Another guy took me to the Embarcadero, where a ship was short-handed, put me on the ship, and that afternoon I was on a ship going to the South Pacific. All pretty exciting so far, a lot of fun. And it was kind of fun seeing, we went by Treasure Island, because that's where the World's Fair was last year. That's Alcatraz. Golden Gate Bridge, and the damn ship just kept going, though, and I pretty sure the Earth was going out of sight, and I was still standing on the road holding my suitcase. And I think I had an intuitive feeling that I'd made the first in an endless series of career mistakes. And somebody sent me, said, "Get to your forecastle." I didn't know what a forecastle was. It turned out to be a sleeping compartment. And I was stuck with 3 of the worst type of people that a young, dumb, pimply-faced kid can be with. And these kind of people are called men. And they looked at me funny, and I didn't know why. I don't know why, because I was the 4th man of their deck watch, and they looked at me, a dumb, stupid little puke, and they realized they're going to have to do their work and mine for the rest of that trip, because I didn't know enough to do anything. But I became kind of a laughing stock for them. It happens in a lot of places, ships or military installations, or any new jobs, If you find somebody that's really dumb, you get a few laughs out of them anyway. After be on the ship for a few days, do my way around, and they can say, "Hey, kid, go down the engine room, get us a left-handed wrench." "Hey, kid, go up at the bridge, tell the captain we need some elbow grease." And one day they said, "Hey, kid, have a drink of whiskey." And I drew the line at that, because I happen to be a Norwegian Lutheran. And Norwegian Lutherans don't drink whiskey, and they don't run around with people who do. And it fell into place right then. These people have black hair. I should have noticed that. These are apparently Catholics. I've heard about them. I've never seen them close up, but they are. Now they're drinking whiskey, so that really I understand. And but finally I took a drink of whiskey just so I'd feel accepted, and it made me sick, and I threw up. I remember they're laughing and sneering, and God, that's a terrible feeling. And I just, all the way across the Central Pacific, but nobody's around, I'd sneak into that guy's sea bag and take a drink of whiskey just to try to hold it down, because I wanted so desperately to be accepted. I couldn't hold it down. I'd throw up, and I'd wipe it up. And we were just coming into Pearl Harbor, and it was still early enough in the war. They're still digging up ships, and these guys are all up watching, and I was down there taking a drink of that stuff. I took another drink, and that day, I remember it was the day before my 16th birthday. I finally held a drink down. And it just made me feel so terrible. Then I couldn't breathe. I thought, why do people drink that? And then something strange happened. All of a sudden, I found myself feeling significantly better. And I realized that's why you drink whiskey. I didn't think much about it because that's, you learn in your teens. I learned how to, you learn about things. And I've always had great admiration for the people who have great insights into each thing in their life. I heard a guy a few years ago said, when I held that drink down, I knew I'd gone into a new garden of experience with many flowers and much fruit to be savored in the coming years, until I was driven from that garden into this program of recovery. I never knew that. All I knew is if you don't puke and you can breathe, it makes you feel better. That's what I learned. I learned how to smoke on that ship. I never smoked, didn't know anybody who smoked. I smoked and puked and smoked and puked and finally smoked, and I smoked 2.5 or 3 packs a day every day for the next 45 years. I learned how to lust effectively. I had never lusted effectively. I had lusted before, but never effectively. Even in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, as a Norwegian Lutheran, at the age of 15, I'd had sex. But I'd been apprehensive and afraid and alone. And they told me this could be done with partners. I learned a lot of things, and I didn't think much about it. I drank, and sometimes I got drunk, and because it was kind of fun, but I tried not to. Like everything else. And I got another ship later, and by the time I was 17, I was a little wiser, and I got enlisted in the Navy when I was old enough. And at the end of the war, at the Naval Hospital up in Northern California being sewed together, and they passed around some tests. And I've always been good on tests because I read a lot. And I did very well this time. I didn't know what the test was for, but they came around a week later and said, oh, Clancy, we're so proud of you. You got the highest grade. We're giving you a high school diploma. And I said, I thought there might be a prize. This is a terrible prize. But I look back now and I can see that really was a great turning spot in my life, because I think if I hadn't taken that test, or if I had just burned it off, as I might have done, when I got out of the Navy, I had to go back to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and they'd wanted me to start my junior year of high school again. And I never would have done that. I was much too slick. But I had this diploma, so I started college, beginning class of 1946. Last fall at the University of Wisconsin, we had a 50th year anniversary of the beginning class of 1946, which doesn't, why would they have why that? Because the beginning class was the most unusual beginning class in the history of American education, for a simple reason. Millions of people came out of the service all at once, and a lot of them discovered they could go to school on the GI Bill and make some money while they decide what to do with their lives. So there are all kinds of people who went to college, sometimes briefly, sometimes for a few months. Some went all the way through. But I mean, you'd find some old hard-bitten sergeant, 40 years old, sitting in freshman English, sitting next to some little girl, 17, just out of high school. You put out, honey. But they're all, it's fun to go back and see these old fools again, and a lot of them still alive. But I went to college, and I did fairly well in college because I had the kind of zip and all this coloration of the returning veteran and so on. And I won a couple of trophies for the university, and I met this girl, and she had lovely coal black hair, which she didn't find much of in Wisconsin, and black flashing eyes, and she won my heart. And after she won my heart and had me trapped, she announced she was a Catholic. And it was too late to do anything about it. I was enmeshed in the throes of love. So we got married. My grandmother had the vapors for about 2 years. But I went out in the world and I became a sports writer, a newspaper sports writer, which to this day is my favorite job I've ever had. But my wife had the weakness that seems to be follow Catholic women a lot. And she was a good Catholic woman. She was a good woman, and that's why she had it. And that is they have a tendency to bury young at an amazing rate. And I hadn't planned on them, and I became a national distributor of small Catholics. Jesus, just boom, 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 which makes the pressure on all the time. So I had to get better jobs. I got into advertising, I got into public relations, and I traveled around the country and I did various places. And all these years I smoked, and I learned to swear on that ship, and I learned to lust effectively, and I learned to drink. And drinking was always a part of my life. I just loved drinking. And I didn't become a terrible, crazed alcoholic. I didn't think I was just a drinker with a... And I can look back now and realize that almost from the first drink I held down, from what I know now, I know that I had an unnatural reaction to alcohol. But I never would knew it then, and I never would have any idea about it. But I look back and I see what alcohol does for people like me, and I presume like most of us in this room. It takes people like me who somehow never feel like they're quite enough. There's something missing inside of me. I don't know what it is, but I know that I must disguise it a lot. And when I have a few drinks, I find myself feeling like I'm more than enough. Disguise nothing. It takes a person like me that lives a lot of secret fear that I've learned to disguise as a kid, and from then on, I'm fine. But inside this, they think they really like you. When I have a few drinks, I become fearless sometimes. I fight cops. I fist fight cops, actually. And I jump off balconies in swimming pools. Don't have a swimming pool? I'll jump on your lawn. Shit, makes no difference to me. I just jump. Takes a person like me who's so afraid of rejection, getting my feelings hurt. I'm almost afraid sometimes to ask my wife to dance when I'm sober. Because she'd say no. When I have a few drinks, it's all different. The best example of that I know is, I must have said it 1,000 times, but I'll say it one more time. I'm sure it's happened to a lot of guys in this room. Find yourself sitting late at night in a bar, having a few drinks, perhaps thinking about how they're screwing you around down to work, and brown nosers are taking over, and people of integrity are being held back. You have a few drinks, and suddenly a miracle takes place in front of your eyes. Some old beast gradually becomes beautiful. I might sidle over to such an old queen at closing time and imply there will be delights beyond her comprehension if she'd like to join me in the old Chevy. If she would say no, God, if I were sober, I'd just cut my wrists right there. When I have it, of course, I wouldn't be in there asking the question if I were sober. When I've had a few drinks, I don't feel rejected. I feel sorry for her. Too bad, bitch, don't come begging tomorrow. That's why I drink. I drink because it gives me a little feeling of being something. And sometimes I drink too much, and then I have a tendency to act bizarrely, they say. So some friends of our family didn't want me to act too bizarrely, so they had heard of this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they suggested I go to a meeting. They didn't know what it did, and I didn't know what it did. I thought maybe they gave you some pill or something so you wouldn't get drunk. And I went to my first AA meeting in 1949. That's a long time ago. A lot of you little snots weren't even born. We love you. But I'm sure I had the same feeling in AA that the new guy that took the chip that I left at the break, I noticed, must have had the same feeling. Bunch of old people, all drunk, been drunk, and once they got I don't know if I ever heard it, but it seemed to me my idea of AA was this. Some old fool standing there with gray hair saying things like, I stayed drunk around the clock, night and day. One day I walked through that door. They told me to put the plug in the jug, and I did. And I've just never been so goddamn happy. There was a little incongruity there somewhere. But I went to AA for a while. I realized I wasn't like these people because I didn't drink. They drank because they were drinkers. I drink because I need the emotional lubrication. And the next few years, I went to AA off and on, different places, went to psychoanalysis, spent thousands of dollars in psychoanalysis to get to the root of my problems. I loved psychoanalysis. I discovered ways that I'd been hurt that I never even realized. I could just climb on board my cross and hang there for a couple hours. I read books, and I had some successes in my work, but I always had a series of bad breaks and misunderstandings. It seemed like I'd be doing good and something would come up. Either I'd get emotionally screwed up, or they'd all go bad on me, or I'd drink too much, or people were stupid, and I'd lose my job. I'd go to a new city and start over again and get my resume and get another job. I was a pretty good writer. I was getting a new job. And I went up and down and up and down. I always knew, one of these days I'm going to find the place I fit, where there won't be so many crapheads and so much stupidity, and I'll really be a live wire. And I went up and down, and one time I went down, and to my absolute shock and chagrin, I didn't come back up. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the situation. All of a sudden, my family was gone. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get hired again. And all of a sudden, everything was gone. And I found myself one morning in a situation that a person in my background and education and intelligence cannot be in. Two big guys were throwing me out of the midnight mission on Skid Row and said, "And stay out of here, you damn bum." And I tried to explain to him, I'm not a damn bum. 3 years ago, I was on the faculty of the University of Texas. Ads that I helped write, the old LC Delmer ads for the Borden Company, were running that very week in Life and Time and Saturday Evening Post. I've had my picture in the New York Times for achievement. How many people do you know have had their picture in the New York Times for achievement? But it's hard to explain these things in midair. You sort of... And about 3 weeks before that, I'd had my front teeth kicked out in the Phoenix trunk tank. So I really wasn't hitting those consonants quite as cleanly as I'd have liked. But I stood outside of the midnight mission. I'd just blown in town apparently about after I got out of Phoenix on the run. I was on the run from Texas. And I stood outside of that mission. I didn't know anybody in California that I knew of well enough to call. And it was a cold, drizzly morning, like we sometimes have in the wintertime. And I stood there and I just couldn't believe this was happening to me. If some old guy would have walked over to me that morning and said, "You know, Slim, you're getting down near death. You're down near 100 pounds. You've lost your wife and children. You'll never see them again. You've lost your home, lost a couple of those. You've lost your career. You were a boy genius," everybody said, "and you can't even get a job washing dishes. You've lost your clothing. You don't even have any clothing except what you got on. Where'd you lose the rest of it? You don't know. And your clothing you got on is wet. And you're an only child, and your mother is not allowed to accept phone calls from you because your stepfather cannot bear to watch you build up her hopes one more time and then demolish them again." He said, "You've been in and out of AA now about 10 years, almost 10 years. Why, for Christ's sake, don't you go to AA and just turn in and do something with your life?" If someone had said that to me, and if I were in an honest mood, which I might not have been, because I'm sure most of us know, when you get into bad times, you lie instinctively to take the heat off if you can. But if I'd have told the truth, I would have had to say something like, "But you don't understand, it is not the way it looks. I am not really an alcoholic. Not really. By that time I wish I were an alcoholic. I would give anything to be an alcoholic. It would make it so simple. But I'm not. I'm not an alcoholic." And if he'd have said, "Well, prove you're not an alcoholic," I wouldn't have been able to do that because I wouldn't have had the detachment to be able to stand back and examine myself. So I probably would have taken refuge behind the defense that frightened people like me take refuge behind, which is bluster, which is, "Get out of my face. Screw you, son of a bitch," because I would have known the right answer. I know the answer now, however. And I know now why I knew and could, if I took a lie detector, I would have said, "I'm not an alcoholic." That needle wouldn't have quivered a 16th of an inch. The main reason I know, because I've learned it here, and I've learned it by watching countless others like me come after me, for this simple reason. I knew what an alcoholic was, and I wasn't that. That's all, just that simple. Which begs the question, well, what's an alcoholic? Well, everybody knows what an alcoholic is. Al-Anons, newcomers, everyone knows what an alcoholic is. There are people who, when they drink too much, or they get in trouble drinking, and pretty soon their lives get screwed up, or they get emotions and pain, and they get driven to some place like AA many times, and the AAs kind of sober them up, and they clean up their act, and they live more comfortably after that. And I know that's true, because I went to meeting year after year around the country as a slipper, and I heard that story many, many times from many, many people in many, many places. And I'll tell you something, I believed it every time.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
I have never once in my life doubted the fact that AA works. I'll tell you something else. I have never known personally a long-term slipper who doesn't believe that AA works. Put it even more intensely, I have never known a long-time drinker who doesn't believe AA works. Which immediately brings us to the point, well, if they all believe AA works, why are they out there slipping? What are they drinking for? For a very simple little reason, one little thing, one little caveat that goes on the end of AA works. And I'm sure all of us have had this feeling at one time or another, and some people stick with this feeling till they die from it. It's quite simple. It's just, yes, AA works, but not for people like me. That's all it takes. But not for people like me. And there's a person in this room, I'm sure, who hasn't had that feeling one time or another, but not for people like me. And why not for people like me? Because my problem really isn't alcohol. My problems are feelings and emotions and the way I've been treated. And as I learned in psychoanalysis, that I wasn't sufficiently nurtured as a child. And lack of sexual abuse. And no, I just put that in. A lot of reasons I knew I was an alcoholic. And I knew there's no question there was something terribly wrong with me. I've known that since I was a boy. But it isn't being an alcohol is not the problem. Alcohol is the closest thing I got to a solution. And sometimes I drink too much of it, and then well-meaning people think my problem is alcohol, and only I know it isn't. But nobody came over and talked to me that morning on that cold, drizzly morning. And I happen to remember that some guy I'd met drunk about a week before that had taken me to an AA place. And I thought I'll go there. I didn't exactly know where it was, but they said I remember it was in Wilshire and Fairfax, wherever the hell that was. And I asked somebody how to get there. They said, well, Wilshire doesn't go through. You have to go up to Hill Street and over to Fairfax, over to Wilshire, and then out Fair. And I walked out to this cold rain. I just didn't feel well. I was desperate and sick. I counted that walk later in my car, some years later. It was 72 blocks. That's a long walk. Some of those blocks are long when you're sick and desperate and shaking and afraid. I remember a woman in New York once upon a time asked me, she said, how could you possibly walk all that distance when you're desperate? And I stopped and remembered, that's the only time you can walk that distance. You could never walk that if you weren't desperate. You would never do that. But if you're desperate, it's funny how much you can do, and we all know that. And I got to this stinking club, and as soon as I saw it, I realized, oh yes, I remember this place. Because I remember being in there and denouncing them and cursing them and telling them how lucky they were to be ignorant and stupid and how lucky they were not to be intelligent. And just. And I went in, they weren't glad to see me, and I wasn't glad to see them. And I felt terrible in there, but I had to get, at least I was out of the rain. Not only was it an AA club, which I'd been a lot of those over the years, but this was full of AA fanatics. I don't know if there's anything more dreary to an intelligent slipper than to be surrounded by AA fanatics. I'll tell you, for an example, I'm not a mooch. I've never been a mooch, except when I've had to be. But sometimes you have to let people know, these well-meaning AAs, how they can help you, so they know how to help you. They don't know. And I remember telling these people, you know, I've never been to AA before, but I've heard about your wonderful program. I've lost everything through alcohol. Now I've come to you for help. I have no place to stay, and I have no money for food, and I have no dry clothes, but I knew if I came to you, my life would get better. Well, that's kind of a general clue, wouldn't you think? Do you know what AA fanatics say? They say, go to a lot of meetings, work the steps, it'll all work out. And of course the answer to that is, oh gee, sir, you're number one with me. But I hung around that damn club all day, and they had a meeting that night, and I filled up on cake, about 4 pounds of chocolate cake. And that night, I had no place to stay. A guy said, look, there's an old abandoned car halfway down the parking lot there, and some tall grass. Some guy named Joe left it here 6 months ago, and I slept in that, and I got up next morning, Sunday morning, I went to this stinking club and ate some more cake and hung around there, and I didn't know what to do. I was just at a loss. This went on for several days. I remember thinking, maybe I'm dead. Maybe this is hell. Maybe I'm paying for it, I'll tell you one thing. I had no idea then or thereafter for a long time that would be my sobriety date, because I didn't intend for it to be and I didn't want it to be. I don't suppose anybody who ever slipped as long as I have, who now stayed sober as long as I have, who doesn't look back and think, what was different this time? What was different? Not only for my own information, but people keep referring long-term slippers to me as though I have some magic answer for them. And I wish I had a magic answer to give them. I used to think when I was years ago, I could talk them into sobriety, but I can't. It took me a long time to discover I can't do that. The best an example of that I know is like a few years ago, I was trying to teach my two grandsons, John and Joe Nutman, to ride a bicycle in my backyard in the driveway. And I'd put them on their bicycle, and they'd fall down and scratch his arm, and Joe got a bloody nose, and John hurt himself. And God, I felt so terrible. He says, we don't want to do this anymore, Grandpa. Yes, you do. You just don't know it. At the end of the day, they could not ride a bicycle, and I felt terrible. Everybody's looking at me funny for being some sort of a sadist. And a few days later, we tried it again, and eventually what happened to those little rats, each of them at different times got a gift that I'm sure most everybody in this room has gotten. Out of nowhere, in a way you could not describe and you could not really tell. All of a sudden comes a sense of balance. And you can now ride a bicycle for the rest of your life, or a motorcycle or anything you want. But you could not give that ability to someone for whom you would give your life. Everybody's got to get on their own bicycle and fall down. And it seems to be that way with sobriety. We cannot give sobriety. People have to do it on their own. We wish we could. I think maybe I wanted to stay sober this time. Was that it? I've come to the end. Nah. I tried to stay sober once with everything I had in me. I was working in Texas, and I was in jail one night I was in jail overnight. And that night was the wrong night because my son died. And I had a bunch of little girls and his son, and it made me feel so bad. I remember putting a little hand on his casket saying, this will never happen again to John. And I stopped drinking, and I went back to AA for a while, went to a psychologist, I'll tell you, when you have a really good motive like that, it does give you reason not to drink, but it just postpones the inevitable. If you're like me, which I presume you are, eventually restlessness and irritability and discontent and feeling of irritation and all the things come back. Now what are you going to do? I can't bear being sober. I need to drink bad, but I promised my dead son I wouldn't drink, so what can you do? So what I did, one day, just in a fit of craziness, pulled my car in the garage, hooked up a hose and the exhaust pipe, and everybody else was in church, turned the motor and went to sleep and died. And some neighbor happened to be watching this, noticed I didn't come out, and came over and pulled me out briefly dead, and beat it in my chest, breathed in my mouth, and they rushed me to the hospital. And after a series of examinations, they decided I was a badly split personality with paranoid tendencies, and they committed me for an indefinite period, perhaps up to the rest of my life, to the Texas State Insane Asylum at Big Spring, Texas. Now that's how I get when I get sober, folks. That's not a goal I'm shooting for. I escaped once. They brought me back and gave me 36 electric shock treatments that winter. And well, the next year, I was thinking, I got to get out of here. This is going to look bad on my resume, just year after. But they put it in the first alcoholic ward in the state of Texas, in that hospital that week, when I was there. And I knew how to hustle AA, so I hustled that AA, and I got finally transferred to the AA ward, and finally got out. And I never had another drink until I ran out of Thorazine. But that's how I get when I stop drinking. I have no desire to stop drinking. Stopping drinking to me indicates suicide or craziness. There's something terribly wrong, and alcohol is one of the few palliatives I have for it. I look back and I think, as best I've been able to tell, one of the best things that ever happened to me was to be, much to my dismay, thrust among fanatics, AA fanatics. I wouldn't call them AA fanatics tonight. I would call them AA winners. To those who are new tonight, they always tell you, stick with the winners, stick with the winners. The question is, who are the winners? Hard to tell. Hard to tell who the winners are. You say the people with the most sobriety, Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're not. There are people with long-time sobriety that I know that I don't even can barely say hello to. They're so sour and negative all the time. So who are the winners? Well, in my opinion, the winners are the people who are currently sitting in the seats, who are currently trying to do what they're supposed to do as best as they can find out, whether it's directions from their sponsor and doing things for the worst of motives, or whether they're just stumbling forward, sticking out hands to new people even though they don't want to, because somebody told them to do that, and maybe picking up the chairs afterwards and doing all these stupid things. The people who are, without even being aware of it, beginning to serve God and man. And that's why they tell you newcomers, stay away from the losers. Well, who are the losers? That's the other hard one to find, because sometimes they're charismatic, they're fun people, and you wonder, Jesus, it can't mean them. I'll tell you how you spot a loser inexorably. When you hear people say, oh, you don't have to do all that stuff. You don't have to go to all those meetings. You don't have to do those things. You know, come on. I never did that. And they'll kill you. They're liable to kill you. You know, over the years, I've done a lot of terrible things in my life, and I've tried to make amends for nearly all of them. But the amends I have never been able to make, and I wish I could, is to go back to, every time I got drunk in the years I was getting drunk in and out of AA, I'd always find a couple other new guys with me to go, we'll all get drunk together. And I must have killed some of those people. And the only way I know to make amends to them is to keep myself a little more flexible and open to people that I would not ordinarily talk to today, new people who are sent to me. I don't have time for it, I give them the time. But stay away from those people. But what these activists do, these winners, they eventually get you taking actions, and nobody cares about your motives. Sitting around with philosophers and people who understand the meaning of the book and the insights of the spiritual life is all very nice. But it isn't worth a pitcher of warm spit when you're new. Because the whole concept of AA is different than that. The concept of AA is that you must begin to act and change your actions and do a specific set of actions little by little. And it's very hard to accept for people like me, and perhaps like some of you who have taken refuge behind imitation intellectuality for a long time, because therapy seems to make sense. You come to us, we will change your thinking and get into your psyche, and as a result of that, eventually your actions will change. And AA says entirely different. These well-meaning amateurs, they say, well, you come to us, we'll change your actions, and eventually your intellect and emotions will change. That's nonsense. Except it's the only thing that's ever worked for people like you and me. That's why this book has a magic word, in case you haven't read it yet. There's a magic word. They call it a magic word. It is not love. It is not comradeship. It is not understanding. All these things are very nice, but the magic word says action is the magic word. And it goes on when you stay around longer and you start to come upon problems. And sometimes you've been sober a while and you're getting off the track a little bit. And you're not, and it happens to everybody because we're all human beings here. We never transcend that drawback. And there's something else that says, when all else fails, it gives us, when all else fails, when you're at the end of your rope, you don't know what to do. What do? Meditate? For Christ's sake, no. Think about it? No. When all else fails, you work with another alcoholic. It doesn't have to be a new one, just someone who is having trouble. And the main reason for that is, as a self-obsessed person who must eventually drink to resolve the conflicts, when I am thinking about that sick puke, I'm not thinking about this sick puke. And it relieves the pressure. And you do the things here little by little. And these people got me doing things. The other thing staying with activists is this. Most of us are emotionally insecure when we may look nice, but we're emotionally insecure. And most of us have a tendency to blend into our background because we're chameleons. We have no great position of our own. So when you're with people who are doing things, eventually you're going to be doing things too. Not because you want to do them, because that's what they're doing, that's all. I remember standing in that club and thinking, God, I've lost my children. I'll never see them again. It's just terrible. I've been sober 4 weeks. And what's the sense even going on? It's just, come on, Clancy, we're all going to the meeting. Hop in the car. I didn't plan to go to that meeting. Thinking about my career is all gone. Come on, we're going to help Fred move his furniture. Oh, shit. You know. I never had a chance to really work up a decent mood. And I survived long enough till I got a sponsor, and a sponsor who saw through my flimsy defenses and was rather strong with me. He intimidated me. And of course, the thing we always talk about tough sponsors, how mean they were. But I look back and I think the reason I let him intimidate me because I respected him. I didn't like him, but I respected him. I've always liked people who I could fool. I didn't respect him, but I liked him. And I disliked people who saw through my crap, but I innately respected him down deep. And he still thought me crap, but he made me take these actions and do these things and intimidated me. I remember some guy one time says, "You don't have to take that crap from him. Go fire him." And I thought, all right. He says, "Bob," he says, "Now what?" "Oh, nothing." Felt like Rosanna, Dana. Never mind, And little by little, he got me to take stupid actions like going to meetings I didn't want to go to and sticking out my hand to people I didn't like and to saying I'm sorry to a woman that I wanted to kill. I stood in the meeting like we had tonight, standing in front of the podium in a Hollywood meeting. I was looking at this woman, and she was a woman I just hated. I just hated her. I wanted to kill her. I wasn't going to do it by just having a few pleasures by thinking, I'd go over and smash her face, and make blood spurt all over and just scream. My sponsor came along and says, "Clancy," so I want you to apologize to her. And I thought, Jesus, he can read my mind. I says, "Why?" He said, I heard last night at the meeting you called her a bitch. I said, "She is a bitch." He says, "Nobody cares what you think. Say you're sorry." And she could hear all this, and she's sitting there. I thought, I'd rather have needles stuck in my eyes than say I'm sorry to that lousy puke. I said, "Bob," he said, "shut up and do it." And I just told him, I said, "Sorry, you bitch." But all kinds of actions like that. And every so often, he'd take advantage of my pain and have me take an AA action. Remember when I had jobs and lost them because I had smart attitudes. I always felt superior, inferior, mostly inferior. It's an amazing thing. I look over my life all those years, I'm sure it's true for most of us. I felt superior sometimes and inferior a lot. The only thing I never felt equal anywhere. Above them or below them, above them or below them. But eventually he took my pain and used that pain to get me to take actions. I think about that. I do a lot of flying now around because I've been sober a long time and I've been active a long time. So in the last few years I've been asked to come and speak in some exotic places like Cape Town and Berlin and London and Auckland and Sydney and a lot of places around the world. And you get in those planes and like the SST to Paris, you're going twice the speed of sound almost. When you land, you figure, I hope we got good brakes on this sumbitch because we're going to be in Russia. But of course, they don't use brakes on planes. They don't use brakes on planes out here. They reverse the thrust of the jets, and that stops the plane. And in much the same way, I look back, and that's what AA did for me. The very same pain that our book and all of our information tells us left untreated, which would get me to have to drink to stand it. If I can allow someone to change the thrust of that pain, that very same pain can be used to get me to take actions I would not take for love or mother or nothing. Just the desperation. And he steered my pain. One day when I lost my job as a dishwasher, I felt so bad, he got me to write an inventory that I swore I'd never write. Because I've taken my inventory with a psychiatrist. Well, I want to take it with an out-of-work actor. And he made me make amends to my father, a man I was thinking about killing. And on and on. And little by little, as I took the actions of AA, my perceptions of the world changed little by little. That's what's so hard to understand when you're new here. Okay, I'll do all these things and I'll become good, but goddamn it, these things are still rotten. What happens is, oddly enough, your perception changes little by little. Because it turns out, in my opinion, the purpose of AA in the long term is to very slowly do what alcohol does fast. To take a person like me, who never feels like I'm quite enough, and most of the time make me feel like I'm enough. To take a person like me who's always lives with fear, and most of the time have not any unnatural fear. to feel like I'm something. But it's a long push. And I have to come to realize there is no way that I can drink. Why? Because drinking has been so bad to me? No, just the opposite. Because drinking has been so good to me. That is the unnatural reaction to alcohol. People wonder, what is that unnatural reaction to alcohol? Alcohol has to do something special for you that it doesn't do for most people. That's the hard thing to understand. We have to say, I was in jail, did this. None of these things would happen if alcohol didn't do something special for you, because as soon as you start doing it, you'd quit. And it turns out that's why stopping drinking doesn't make it better. People are always saying, well, I think AA works for me. I've stopped drinking, I don't feel better. That's the difference. I never thought I could be an alcoholic because I knew alcohol was not really my problem. Imagine my surprise after being here a while and taking actions and learning that is absolutely correct. My problem is not alcohol. In fact, if your problem is alcohol, you're in the wrong place. You should be somewhere else. You know, of course the problem is alcohol. Everybody knows that. I can disprove that in 5 seconds. If alcohol is the problem, detoxes turn out recovered people. And they don't. Treatment centers turn out recovered people. Hospitals, they don't. They turn out sober people with varying amounts of information. But if they'd be like me, unless something dramatic happens after that, sooner or later they must always eventually drink or sedate. Well, if the problem isn't alcohol, what is it? It's something that sounds like alcohol, and people like me and most of you get confused about it. It's something called alcoholism. It's the same thing. Alcoholism, not the same thing. Very different. I'll guarantee you, if you be like me, that the time will come when your life and insanity will depend on remembering the difference. And I can talk on those differences for 2 hours, but I'll put it in one sentence. An alcohol problem is overcome by stopping drinking and cleaning up your act. However, in this strange thing called alcoholism, this mind-consuming, bodily destroying, spirituality extinguishing, eventually fatal thing called alcoholism, you'll discover sooner or later, if you haven't discovered it yet, that stopping drinking and cleaning up your act has no significant long-term effect on your life other than to gradually make it so painful you can't stand it. But even that doesn't make you an alcoholic. That just prepares you. One other thing must be present. You must get an unnatural reaction to alcohol, and the problem is no one ever knows it's an unnatural reaction. There's nothing to compare it against. It's like saying, do you get an unnatural flavor from strawberries? How do I know? I get the only flavor I know from strawberries. The unnatural effects, as I said, it must have the power to almost instantly alter your perception of reality and make everything all right. But over a period of time, as you come to depend upon it, it gets to be a problem. So then you got to stop drinking. Then you realize it wasn't drinking, it was all these problems. So you eventually got to drink. But you can't keep drinking, so you got to get sober. And you can't stand being sober, so you got to drink. And you can't stand drinking, so you got to get sober. That's called alcoholism. And today in America, where there's more sobriety than any place in the history of the world, it is estimated about 95% of alcoholics still die drunk, or as a direct result of drinking. And they die, I'm sure, saying the same things. But I'm not really an alcoholic. You don't understand. My case is different. My problems came when I was sober. I drank just to get some relief. I didn't go to all those jails and nut houses. I just drank just relief, got a little out of hand, that's all. They don't realize they've just defined the disease of alcoholism. And I'm sure if you're kind of new, you might think to yourself, well, it's okay for this old boob. He came off Skid Row. He should be glad he's alive. But over the years, I've sponsored a lot of people. I've sponsored the man that put the flag on the moon. I've sponsored a millionaire. And I've sponsored guys who won the Emmy the last 3 years in a row. I've sponsored all kinds of people. Truck drivers, guys on the Skid Row. What do we all have in common? We weren't all thrown out of the midnight mission with our teeth kicked out. What we have in common, we got to a point where sobriety was untenable and alcohol was untenable. And you got to remember this. AA was never designed to deal with drinking. It was designed to deal with lack of drinking, because that's where the curse is. That's why we gather together to share our experience, strength, and hope. And that's why most of us eventually want to have sponsors, be connected with activists, and so they'll pull us along on the days we don't feel like pulling ourselves along, so we won't get too out of whack. A young lady I was talking to that I knew before the meeting, she came up to me and she said, I just feel so terrible. I feel like drinking. I just don't know why. And I would talk to her, and turned out she'd been getting about 4 hours sleep all week because of one problem or another. And she has to go to work 7 in the morning. She said, I just don't know what I'm going to do. And, you know, as much as I hate to have anyone miss my golden words, I said, your solution is to go home and go to bed right now. Not to look for any more truth, for Christ's sake. Just go to bed. That's what they mean, don't get hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Not because they're bad things, but they distort your perception. They make things crappy. That's why you do these things here, and you try to join in and become part of something. So you feel like you have a little dignity, and you live with something. Just in passing, I'll say one last thing. Little by little, after a long time, a very slow recovery, but I eventually became somewhat successful again, and got working in radio and television in Hollywood and some big corporations and advertising, and I was slicker than snot. And one day, in some hideous fit of job misperception again, I left a job in Beverly Hills, and for the last 23 years, I run the Midnight Mission on Skid Row, a place that threw me out in 1958. And people say, why would you give up your career to run that stinking mission? And I tried to explain to them, it's such a significant decrease in salary, I thought it must be spiritual, but it wasn't. But this morning I went to work, and I'd rather have been going to Beverly Hills, because I didn't want to go down there and see who died last night and who got stabbed last night and all the, like I'm watching the Mississippi River misery going by. But right up there tonight, it isn't a treatment center, it's nothing like that. But I have a staff of 100, and all of them are off the street. And we know what we're doing, I think. I came home tonight, I always feel a little bit of feeling that that's right. That's where I can make use of whatever knowledge I have of the world. I'm glad to be there. I come home to a different world out by the ocean, but I spend the days down there watching them die and pulling them out if I can. Now, if you're new tonight, I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Even if you go to AA and get a sponsor, stay with activists, take these steps, we can't guarantee you that in 15 years you can have your own mission. There's only so many to go around. I've got mine, and that's for you. But I can guarantee you'll walk with some degree of dignity and then find yourself enjoying life and wondering, my God, how did this ever happen? Wednesday of this week, I found myself turning 70, and I always feel like I'm about 32. And I remember when I was 29, I committed suicide because I couldn't bear another year. Now I feel younger now by far than I did then. That's a good reason to stay sober. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. Shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.